Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first webinar for the semester. We're very excited about this webinar series this semester because, of course, it's a midterm voting year, so we have lots of good things to talk about and to share information about. So our webinar today is called Purple Texas, and so it's about whether Texas is red, blue, or potentially purple. And so I'm Allegra Davis Hanna. I'm the chair of English and Humanities, and I'm really just here as a facilitator and host. Our expert on the topic is Missy Wilson Mertens, who I assume can introduce herself.
Yes, so I teach history and government, and I am the chair of social sciences at Connect.
All right, so thank you all for being here. We want to welcome you, and if you're watching this live or on the recording, we're very excited to be here. So Missy, most people think of Texas as being a one-party state, as being pretty solidly Republican voting. So has that always been the case?
That has not always been the case, and it's really kind of a myth. So Professor Cox and I are working on a project for Texas government that we're about to get started on here pretty soon. And preparing for that, I've been doing a lot of reading about Texas. And one thing I read in a textbook said, as everyone knows, Texas has always been conservative. And that kind of blew my mind because it hasn't always been conservative. So if you're looking at our pictures here, first we have Sam Houston, who was the first president of Texas and led the Texas Army during the Revolution. He had some ideas that were conservative and some that definitely were not. And then that second picture is Lyndon Johnson, and that is my absolute favorite picture of him. This is in 1960 when he is campaigning with JFK. And if you look at Kennedy's face, you can just tell this is not the first time he's had to drag Johnson off the stage. Somebody started heckling Johnson, so he started yelling back.
Yeah, John F. Kennedy definitely has like a calm down, bro, facial expression.
And then in the 1990s, we had Ann Richards as our governor. Again, not a conservative person in any shape or form. And then after Ann Richards left, we go right into George W. Bush. So to say our state has always been one thing really is a very, very simplified view of our history. It hasn't always been one thing.
All right, so we were blue and then red and then blue and then red is what you're saying?
I'm saying that to even say we are blue or red is probably an oversimplification. So if we can go to the next slide.
Some very obvious facts about Texas.
Yeah, I know everyone knows this. But when we say, oh, Texas is red, that makes no sense to me because Texas is so big. If you think about like saying something like, oh, Connecticut is all one thing or Rhode Island is all one thing, even that's an oversimplification, but they're very small places. We are not. We have 28.6 million people in Texas. We are not all one thing. We are also very diverse. We are the second most diverse state in our nation, California being the first, and then Texas right behind it. If you look at our demographics, we are 42% white, 39% Hispanic, almost 12% Black or African American, 5% Asian, 0.3% American Indian, and then 0.1% Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. Very, very, very diverse. We have a multitude of cultural influences. You guys have probably all been to Six Flags Over Texas, right? We've been French, we've been Spanish, we've been Texas as a country, we've been the United States, we've been the Confederacy. We have all of those different historical and cultural influences that have brought us to the state we are today. And again, just never in our history have we been just one thing. I like this picture. I know this is probably breaking Professor Davis Hanna's brain a little bit because the places are not on the map where they should be.
That's not where these things are.
No.
Also, South Padre looks like a pickle.
I noticed that too, but I'm pretending that's a best made pickle right there. So I liked this map because it showed that we have NASA, we have a cruise industry, we have agriculture, we have the ranching industry, we have a music scene. All of that is on this map, and that's all part of Texas. So if we go one more slide forward, I want to talk about our founding. I think when you're in 4th and 7th grade, we tend to tell this story in history class of Texas belonged to Mexico, and then some Americans came down to Texas, and Americans fought Mexicans, and then Texas became its own country. Kinda. That's kind of what happened. But there's also Tejanos that are living in Texas that fought with the revolution. So the picture in the middle there, that's Juan Seguin. He was a Tejano living in Texas that sided with the Texas Revolution and fought against Mexico for Texas independence. That's a fairly common story. If you look at Bowie married into a Tejano family in San Antonio, and they were leaning towards the independence movement. When you look at Texas as a republic, we had this very unique constitution that we set up. So you could be president more than once in Texas, but not consecutively. So Sam Houston's president for 2 years, and then he has to leave office, and then we put Mirabeau Lamar in, and then he's president for 2 years, and we go back to Sam Houston. So for the modern world, if you can imagine 2 years of Obama, then 2 years of Trump, then 2 years of Obama, then 2 years of Trump, it would be really hard to say what we were, right? Because we would be changing our policies literally every 2 years. And that's what Texas did for the entire time that we were a republic. I think there's a point in our history where we think, okay, all of Texas probably got behind the Confederacy in the Civil War. So if we can jump one more forward, that's not even true. Texas is so big and again has such diverse influences that not all Texans thought that we should side with the Confederacy during the Civil War. There's a huge group of Tejanos and Mexican Americans that chose to fight for the Union. We had a good number of German Texans in North Texas and in Hill Country that tried to join the Union. We even had a secession movement in North Texas to try to break off and become their own state like West Virginia did, so that that group could side with the Union. What you're seeing here is a monument to a group of German Texans that tried to flee into Mexico. And then from Mexico, they were going to catch a boat and go back up to the north and join the Union Army. Before they could do that, they are captured by the Confederate forces and there's a massacre. So this monument is to them where they died in Comfort, Texas. This is one of the only monuments for Union soldiers in a southern state. So again, our history is just a little different. Things are just a little weird in Texas. If we jump forward to the progressive era, we elected a female governor.
Hey, Missy, for the non-historians among us, when is the progressive era?
Turn of the century, almost into 1920. Sorry.
Okay.
So we are the second state in the nation. Wyoming beat us by about 2 weeks to elect a female governor. So if you think turn of the century, oh, Texas is this conservative place, they're never going to elect a woman. Well, that's not true. We did. Now, to be completely fair, she's running because her husband had been governor once already and been impeached, and so he wasn't allowed to be governor again. So her campaign slogan was 2 governors for the price of 1. And she promised that if you elected her, she would just basically let her husband do the job. But still, we elected a woman in the early 20th century.
So not a feminist icon.
I wouldn't label her that way.
Okay.
Some people might, I wouldn't. So if we move to the modern era, which is anything after World War II, you start to see this more coalescing around parties. But in 1960, 1964, you can see the map. Texas voted overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. Now, there's a political realignment that's going to happen at the end of the 60s, into the 70s, and it's completely finished by the 80s, where the Democratic Party and the Republican Party essentially switch their policy positions. So by the time we're in 2012 and you see Texas has gone from blue to red, we shouldn't think of that as everybody in Texas has altered their political opinions. It's more that the parties themselves have altered their political opinions. But there was a couple of things about these maps I wanted to point out. And I wanted you guys to see, one, there are areas that didn't convert to the Republican Party, and they tended to be around the Rio Grande Valley. And then in very urban areas, the little blue square in North Texas. Do we know what county that is?
Dallas County.
It is Dallas County. So very urban areas tended to go to the Democratic Party, and then the more rural areas tended to go to the Republican Party. I will point out Tarrant County is weird here. We kind of go back and forth pretty often. So it just depends on what year of map I pull up, if Tarrant would also have been blue.
Is this also influenced by the fact that Lyndon B. Johnson is also from Texas? Are people like
Absolutely.
more likely to vote for someone from their home state?
Absolutely. He's a Texas boy, right? Johnson County is for his family. So for sure, Texans are supporting him a little bit because he's one of their own. He's also the reason that realignment continued to happen because Lyndon Johnson passed the Great Society, didn't do fantastic in the Vietnam War, and then the Civil Rights Act was passed, and all of that helped push Democrats more into the North and Republicans more into the South. So he won Texas, and I think you'd also make a very real argument that he's also the reason the Democrats lost Texas.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you may think to yourself, why is any of this important? Why do I care? And the reason that you should care is because Texas is, again, massive. And we are a huge, huge, huge driver of the United States as a whole. There's a couple of different authors that have published books that say things like, as go Texas, so goes the nation, or Texas is the canary in the coal mine for the United States. Because of our position in the country and because of our population, what happens here really, really matters. So from 2010 to 2020, we had a massive population growth. Our population went up about 20%. So that's huge. That alone is huge. Because our population grew so much and other states shrank, we got 2 more seats in the House of Representatives. So we now have 38 representatives in Congress. Again, that means California has a little bit more pull than us, but that's it. It's Texas and California in the House of Representatives that have those massive contingencies. If you want to talk about Texas and the economy, we make up almost 10% of the entire United States economy. And some economists have done this like what if scenario, what if Texas were to secede and become our own nation? And depending on how you count it, it's varied, but there are some economists that say if that were to happen, we would be the 7th, 8th, 9th strongest economy in the world if we were our own country. Now, there are other economists that say, yeah, but you're not factoring in the military, you're not factoring in the supply chain, you're not factoring in all of the federal money that comes into Texas. But that still shows you how important this economy is to the nation as a whole. And then finally, what we teach in Texas becomes important to the nation because we buy so many textbooks. We have millions of school children in Texas. We like to have standardized books whenever we possibly can because it just makes the purchasing process easier. So if you're a publisher and you know that, you're going to cater your books to what Texas wants so that Texas will buy your books. And then Oklahoma just kind of has to use what Texas publishes, if that makes sense.
What is this just like a map of Texas? Like what's the color on this map represented?
Oh, thank you. The colors on the map are places in Texas that have gained population. So in the last 10 years. So the darker green it is, the more people have moved there. So as you guys probably know in DFW, our home prices are skyrocketing. Our highways are very congested. It's because we've had about a 40% population growth in the last 10 years. We weren't really ready for that quite yet. And then the whitish yellowy areas are areas of either stagnation or decline. And then the darker orange is people that have moved out of those areas, usually to the larger cities. But there are some. Sorry.
It's more. I mean, it looks like it's urbanizing more.
Yes, there's that draw to the bigger cities for sure. So if you listen to politics, if you are the kind of person who just has NPR on all the time in the background, I know I'm talking like just to myself right now. You might have heard a lot of news stories in the last 4 to 5 years saying that Texas is changing. Texas is a quote unquote toss up state. Texas is a purple state. Texas is not a strong Republican state anymore. And that, again, it's an oversimplification. But breaking that down, if you look at what are those reports trying to say, there are a couple of reasons that those reports are being published and produced. So the very first most important thing is that more people are registering to vote in Texas. So how do you determine if you're red or blue? By elections. That's how we determine that. We don't take polls about how people feel. We have elections, and elections determine those outcomes. So one, there are more people in Texas, right? So that automatically is going to be that we have more votes. But also the percentage of people registering to vote is gaining in relation to the population. So in total numbers, we're growing. Also in people registering to vote, we're growing.
So the orange lines are number of residents and the blue lines are number of registered voters. Is that right?
Yes. So we're gaining population in total real numbers. We're also gaining percentages of eligible voters who want to vote. That population, the blue line will never equal the orange line because there are people that are not eligible to vote, right? If you're under 18, you can't vote. So those lines will never be equal. But the blue line, percentage-wise, is getting higher, which is what we want to see. More people are registering to vote, more people are becoming involved. So the second thing that's changing, and this is not just in Texas, we're seeing a demographic shift. There were certain populations that for years and years and years were considered reliable voters for each party. Those are in flux right now. So for a long time, Hispanic or Latino voters were considered reliable Democrats. That is changing. That is no longer true. And it's changing in different ways in different states. So for Texas, for a really long time, Hispanic voters tended to vote for the Democratic Party. Because of culture and religion, that is changing. And we're seeing more Hispanic voters lean towards the Republican Party, especially in the Rio Grande Valley. So not so much in urban areas, but along the southern part of Texas, we are seeing that shift. Another thing that's happening here is that both of the political parties have been fighting for these voters since the 1960s. In 1960, Kennedy had a campaign called the Viva Kennedy campaign, and he specifically went to Hispanic areas in Texas and tried to get those people to vote for him. So because of that population having such an important part and because it's growing percentage-wise in our demographics, both political parties are trying to reach out to Hispanic voters. And what we are finding now is that all Hispanic voters are not the same. So Cuban voters are not the same as Mexican voters, are the same as Puerto Rican voters. So we're trying to tailor those messages, both parties are, to those individual groups. And it just turns out the Republican Party is doing a little bit better at that messaging than the Democratic Party is in Texas right now.
Are there other
change?
Are there other groups that used to be reliable for one party over another? I mean, is this same thing happening with other voting blocks? Like what?
For a long time, college educated voters tended to vote with the Republicans. That is no longer true. Now college educated voters are more leaning towards Democratic voters. We're seeing a little bit of a shift in some states with union voters. And again, these identities all overlap, right? So you could be a Hispanic college educated union member, and that will change that algorithm a little bit to where you end up. And of course, your own personal religious and cultural moral beliefs will also play in. But yeah, both parties are shifting somewhat. There are some political scientists arguing that we're going through another realignment. I don't think we're quite there yet, but maybe in the next 10, 15 years, we might see that.
Interesting.
So politics never stays the same, right? Things are always changing. And then the last thing that's really, really affecting our standing is that Gen Z has started to vote. Ellinger, what do you call us? Millennials? Is that your word?
Yes, we're elder millennials, Misty.
Elder millennials. So we're millennials, but like just barely. We've been able to vote for like 20 years.
Don't say things like that.
Sorry. Gen Z is just now starting to be able to vote. The oldest Gen Zers, I think, have been able to vote in 2 presidential elections. What's interesting about Gen Z is that they are the least partisan, most politically oriented cohort that we have seen since World War II.
Hold on, what does that mean though? Least partisan, most politically active. So how does that work?
So Gen Zers tend to not align themselves with a party. You don't hear a lot of Gen Zers saying, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. Most of them will take the label of independent,
So
but
they're
huh?
they're passionate about particular issues.
Yes, or particular politicians.
Oh,
So, like Bernie Sanders has a pretty high following among some Gen Zers, but not
one
necessarily
of
to
the
a
oldest
party.
people in politics. Great. Okay.
Yes, but they tend to be motivated, like you said, by issues, and they tend to be motivated much younger than previous generations. So for like a lot of millennials, you didn't really see a lot of registering to vote and consistent voting until they got into their late 20s, early 30s, till they were homeowners, they were having children. Gen Zers, by contrast, have been politically activated, some of them before they could even vote. The students who formed interest groups after the Parkland shooting are a great example of that. They formed a political action group before they even were 18. That's rare, and it's something kind of new in our political scene.
Yeah. So, I mean, this says ages 13 to 14, 2/3 of them are at least interested in politics, and half of them are somewhat interested or more. 13.
Right. And if you think about what they have lived through in their lives, this absolutely makes sense. Because when they were babies, there was still the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. They've lived through one, if not two, economic crashes, COVID, lockdowns, school shootings. Their entire lives have been in crisis in some way, shape, or form. So they're looking for solutions, social solutions to that problem. And what I mean by social solution is they're trying to change it as a whole, whereas millennials tended to see this as an individual change. So if you're a millennial and you were very interested in school shootings, your thought might have been, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to make a lot of money, I'm going to buy a house in a good neighborhood, and I'm going to send my kid to a safe school. It's a very individualistic view of how to solve that problem, whereas Gen Z tends to take a more societal approach to that problem. And they're very young, right? So all of that could change, but that's what we're seeing in the data right now.
Fascinating. Okay, so are we blue? Are we red? Are we purple? What's happening?
So in 2020, Professor Cox, and Professor Thurman did a webinar on, is Texas going to turn blue in the 2020 election? And I pulled this slide directly from that previous webinar. And these were all of the headlines we were seeing in October and November of 2020, right before the election. And there was this, in the media anyway, this real, I don't want to say concern, debate. Is Texas turning blue or is it not? So there was all of this noise around this issue. And then we got to the 2020 election and we got the results.
Doesn't look too blue to me.
So I tell my students, maps are tricky because you can lie with a map. This is how each county voted in the 2020 presidential election. So the darker red, the more Republican, the darker blue, the more Democratic leaning. So if I just go county by county by county, Texas looks pretty red, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look purple at all. It
Mm-mm.
barely has any points of blue. Then you can look at the numbers. So the numbers tell a slightly different story. If we go by percentage of voters, Texas was 52% Republican, 46.5% Democratic. That's a little closer. That doesn't look, if you look at the numbers, that doesn't look quite so red, even if the map here still does look very, very red. And in terms of real numbers, you can see a little bit of a different view here. So this map is looking at how people voted. So not how counties voted, but how people voted. So the larger the circle, the more people. So Houston, huge population, huge circle. Hico in Hill Country, not a very big population, tiny little circle. So this looks more purpley because in the urban centers, you see the bigger circles and they tended to vote blue.
Well, and in the RGV too.
The one thing I'll say about this is, again, Tarrant County, right? Fort Worth, we're a little weird. So we're showing blue there, but it was a light blue, like just barely blue. All right, so if we go one more forward.
Oh, that's the number. So
yes, let's go to this. All right, so I found a website where you can blend colors together, and I think this website is actually so that you can like decide what color to put on your walls, paint. But what I did is I went in and I put in 52.2% red and 46.4% blue. And this is the color it gave me. So if we're looking statewide, based on the last presidential election, Texas is purple. It's a reddish purple, but we're purple.
Interesting.
But we don't vote in percentages, right? We vote in winners and losers, real numbers. So
unfortunately, yes.
Yes. So the question becomes, are we going to really be purple? Are we going to stay purple? Are races here going to be competitive?
Is there, I mean, and that's two questions, right? Because that's for the presidential election, but that might be different in a gubernatorial election, right?
Not really, because that is also a statewide election. So much like our electoral college votes, it's either red or blue.
Right.
Governorship, red or blue.
But just because I like the Republican candidate for president, right? Don't we have some voters who depends on the person or depends on the issue?
Absolutely. Gen Z, right? All of them. Independents, absolutely. So, and again, we've had a population shift even in the last 2 years. So just because something happened in 2020 doesn't mean that's going to happen in 2022. So our next 3 or 4 election cycles are probably really going to tell us how red or purple we are. So we know that if we're just looking, if we blend the two colors together, we're pretty purple. But if we're looking at races, are we competitive or are we not? So this is a poll on Greg Abbott versus Beto O'Rourke. And I pulled this 2 nights ago. It's already wrong. Polls have come out since then. And I think Abbott has like a 9-point lead right now. That'll be wrong tomorrow. So don't get too attached to those numbers. What I wanted to show y'all with this is that this race is more competitive than previous governor's races in the last 10 to 15 years. Abbott has had to spend some money against O'Rourke that maybe if he was running in the early 2000s, he might not have had to spend. This is a competitive race. I know it's a 9-point race, but in Texas, that's competitive. If we continue to see those kinds of elections where it's close numbers, then we are a purple state because it's competitive. It could go to either side. And honestly, that's kind of where we want to be, right? Because if it's competitive, it means that people are paying attention to the issues. We have people voting based on who is running, not necessarily the party. That's really kind of what we want to see in a democracy. We want to see every race be competitive. Our predictions are...
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. that Texas is going to continue to be a majority minority state, that our population is going to continue to grow, and that our demographics are going to continue to shift. All of that means our politics are likely to continue to be purple-ish. So for students, I would say pay attention to this governor's race, the presidential race in 2 years, and then the next governor's race. And by those 3 cycles, we should see more clearly how red, blue, or purple we are. My personal prediction, which I would put no weight into whatsoever, is that we are going to get more and more competitive in these races. I don't think we'll ever be a toss-up state, or at least not for like the next 20 years. But I think we're going to have competitive candidates, which is a good thing. We want our races to be competitive. All right, so like I just said, this is a midterm election year. And so all of our students should go register to vote. Yesterday was National Voter Registration Day. In my house, we celebrated with cake. I don't know how everybody else celebrates.
I don't know that that's something people typically celebrate.
You should. You get registered to vote and you have cake. I guess balloons if you really want to. But you still have time. If you didn't do it yesterday, you still have time. October 11th is the last day that you can register to vote. And we're going to have Voter Education Week. It's a nationwide thing, October 3rd through 7th. And then early voting starts October 24th. For students who it's the first time to vote, they're a little unsure where to go or what to do, we're going to have some open office hours on October 24th to answer those questions for you. So look for that flyer. It's going to be coming out soon. And if you just need a little bit of reassurance that you're going to the right place and you have everything you need, stop by those open hours, log in virtually. We'll walk you through it. And then you can go vote and know that you're going to do the right thing and be a confident voter. And then our midterm election is on November 8th. And generally, the number of people that vote in a non-presidential year is lower. If we could get 50% of our students to vote, that would be amazing. So you're also going to see coming out a pledge to vote if you didn't already get it yesterday. So sign the pledge, and if you sign that, we'll make sure to send you reminders when it's time for you to go vote, so that way you don't forget. And again, our goal is that 50% of our Tarrant County College students would go vote.
So we have we have more webinars coming up this semester.
They will be new.
That's true. As we prepare for and then recover from, I guess is the verb I'm looking for, the midterm election. So on the 12th of October, we're going to talk about those single issue voters. And we touched on it a little bit, but those are people who are motivated primarily by a single issue, and those issues tend to be the same 4 or 5. On October 26th, we're going to talk about Twitter politics, and that's really not just Twitter, but social media and how it affects campaigning and politics, misinformation. And then we'll have the election in early November, and then on the 16th, we'll kind of have a webinar to make sense of what happened and to maybe revisit some of these questions about how competitive the governor's race was and how many seats switched from one party to another, and review what happened and who our elected officials are. So all of that is this semester. And finally, Misty's going to talk to you about how to get credit for attending or viewing the recording.
All right, so the link is in the chat. If you're watching the recording, the link will also be in the video description. Click that link. We'll keep that link open. It's Wednesday, so let's just say till Monday. We'll leave the link for live viewing open until Monday. If you click on that link and fill it out, that is how you get credit for attending. Your instructor might have something else that they want you to do, like write up a summary or answer a couple of questions. So if your instructor asks you to do that, make sure that you do that as well. After Monday, we collect all of the responses and we mail them to your instructor so that they know who attended and that you can get the credit for that. Some people put their credit in right away, but if you're in Professor Davis Hannis's class, She puts it in at the very end.
The very
So,
end.
so just know that if you email her every single week asking about this, the answer will not change. It's going to be at the end of the semester. Did I miss anything?
Probably, but I don't know what it would be. Your whole department is here. I don't know if any of you have questions, but I will. I don't know that they can unmute themselves.